the sacred routine and profanation. 10 years is 3,650 days. Arthur Vance knew this not because he counted the days on the calendar, but because he counted his steps. It was exactly 800 steps from the porch of his empty house to the top of Cedar Hill, where the earth was softer and the view of the valley was eternal. He made this walk every day, rain or shine, or even when the snow that buries the world fell. He went there to talk to the stone. The gravestone was of imported, expensive gray granite. Engraved on it were two names, Eleanor Vance and Samuel Vance, wife and son, taken that same night by a fever that Arthur's money couldn't cure and that his brute strength couldn't intimidate. From that night on, Arthur, the greatest rancher in Red Creek County, had become a ghost. He breathed, ate, and worked, but the light behind his eyes had gone out. He was a hollow man, filled only with routine and bitterness. That Tuesday afternoon, the sky was the color of a purple bruise, promising an electrical storm. The air was heavy, still. Arthur climbed the hill with his usual bouquet of wildflowers, the only living things he allowed to touch that sacred ground. He walked with his head down, his black Stetson hat covering his eyes, immersed in the silence that was his only companion. But when he reached the wrought iron gate that surrounded the small family tomb, he stopped. Something was wrong. Arthur knew every inch of that place. He knew where the moss grew on the stone. He knew how the grass bent in the north wind. And he knew, with the certainty of a territorial predator, that something had changed. There was a shape on the grave, an irregular mound, covered in dirty rags, huddled right on top of the earth where Eleanor slept. Rage surged through Arthur's throat like hot bile. Profanation. Someone had dared. Some city drunk, some disrespectful vagabond, had decided to use his family's resting place as a mattress. Arthur dropped the flowers. They fell to the ground with a mournful murmur. His right hand instinctively went to his belt, where his revolver rested. He didn't intend to shoot, but the weapon was an extension of his will. He opened the iron gate. The creaking of the rusty hinges sounded like a scream in the silence of the cemetery. "Get up!" Arthur thundered. His voice, hoarse from disuse, cut through the still air. "Get up before I drag you down and throw you over the hill." The shape beneath the rags shifted. It wasn't the abrupt movement of a drunken man waking up for a fight. It was a shrinking, a tremor. The mound of old cloth seemed to try to get smaller, to disappear into the cold stone. Arthur took to long strides, his heavy boots crushing the grass. He reached out his large, calloused hand, grabbed what felt like a shoulder covered in filthy wool, and pulled hard. "I told you to get out of." The words died in Arthur's mouth. What he revealed was not a man. It was not a vagrant. It was a pair of eyes. Large, brown eyes, wide with terror, set in a small face. Dirty with soot. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. She was so thin she looked like she was made of twigs and fear. She didn't scream. She didn't try to run away. She just stared at him, paralyzed. Like a rabbit caught in the shadow of a hawk, she lay directly on the gravestone, embracing the cold stone as if it were a mother. Arthur froze, his hand still clutching the soiled rag of her clothing. His anger, poised to explode into violence, clashed with the confusion and dissolved into shock. A child, a filthy child, sleeping on top of Eleanor. "What da?" Arthur stammered, something he hadn't done in decades. "What are you doing here?" The girl shivered. Her lips were purple with cold, even though it wasn't winter. She looked as hard. "That's Arthur. She's hot, double quotes," the girl whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle like old glass. Arthur frowned. "The stone," the girl replied, wiping Eleanor's name with her dirty little hand. "The stone holds the sun. It's the only warm place." The sentence hit Arthur in the chest with the force of a mule's kick. She wasn't desecrating it. She was surviving. She was using her dead wife's grave to avoid freezing to death. The macabre irony and sadness of that scene made Arthur's world spin slightly. He let go of her shoulder as if he had been burned. He took a step back. "You can't stay here," he said, trying to regain his usual harshness. But his voice faltered. "This is a resting place for the dead." "I know," the girl said, sitting up and pulling the rags around her bony knees. The living kick me. The dead don't care. The girl, she pointed to the name on the stone. She doesn't care. I asked before I lay down. Arthur looked at the girl. Then he looked at Eleanor's name. He felt ping, a ping he sought. What cries Eleanor? Eleanor he straits. Eleanor, who never closed the door to anyone. If she were alive, what would she do? Arthur knew the answer, and that answer terrified him. The thunder crackled above them, loud and violent. The first drop of rain, thick and heavy, fell on the girl's cheek, wiping away a trail of dirt. It's going to rain, Arthur said, stupidly, obviously. I know, the girl said, shrinking back again. I have a canvas bag. I'll be fine. She pulled a piece of torn, waxed canvas from under the rags and tried to cover herself, preparing to face the storm right there, on top of his family's bones. Arthur looked down at the house below. 800 paces. A house with 10 empty rooms, cold fireplaces, pantries full of food that was rotting because he had no appetite. He looked at the girl. No, he growled. The girl shuddered, anticipating the blow. Get up, Arthur ordered, but this time there was no threat in his voice, only a weary resignation. You're not sleeping in the rain. Not on my watch. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and started down the hill. He took 5 steps and stopped. He didn't hear any footsteps behind him. He turned around. The girl was still there, looking at him with utter distrust. Are you coming or not? He shouted against the wind. I have soup and a roof that doesn't leak. The mention of soup made her eyes light up. Hunger overcame fear. She stood up, unsteady on her feet, and began to follow him, keeping a safe distance of 5 meters. Like a stray dog that wants food but fears being kicked. Arthur Vance was breaking his promise. He was taking something alive home, and as he walked down the hill, he could swear he heard, in the whisper of the wind in the trees, Eleanor's soft laughter, the invasion of the haunted house, and the tin can bath. Arthur Vance's house was a mausoleum, large, Victorian, with dark wood and heavy curtains that had been drawn for a decade. The air inside was stagnant, smelling of furniture, wax, and silence. When Arthur opened the front door, the girl stopped in the doorway. She stared into the dark interior, like the mouth of a cave. Come in, Arthur said, taking off his wet hat and hanging it on the staghorn coat rack. Wipe your feet. I don't want mud on the Persian rug. The girl looked at her own feet barefoot, black with dirt and calluses. She looked at the rug. She didn't move. Arthur sighed a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of a well. He'd forgotten how children take everything so literally. Forget the rug, he grumbled. Just come inside before the wind chills the house. She entered. Her footsteps were inaudible on the wooden floor. She moved like a shadow, huddled together, her eyes scanning the room for dangers and escape routes. Arthur went straight to the kitchen. It was the only room in the house that still seemed alive. However faintly, he lit the wood-burning stove, the fire crackling merrily, indifferent to its owner's gloomy mood. He put a pot of yesterday's stew on to reheat. The smell of meat and potatoes filled the air. He heard the girl's stomach rumble aloud, guttural sound that made her blush with embarrassment beneath the layer of dirt. Take a seat. Arthur gestured to the solid oak table. She sat on the edge of the chair, ready to pounce. Arthur poured a full bowl, cut a thick slice of bread, and placed it in front of her. He didn't offer cutlery. He knew that hunger at that stage has no patience for etiquette. The girl ate like a starving animal. She used her hands, stuffing the bread into the stew, swallowing whole chunks of meat. Arthur watched, leaning against the sink, his arms crossed. He felt a strange mixture of revulsion and pity. How long had it been since she'd eaten? Days, weeks. When she finished, licking her fingers, she looked at him. For the first time, the fear in her eyes lessened slightly, replaced by a cautious curiosity. What's your name? Arthur asked. Nobody, she replied. Arthur frowned. Nobody isn't a name. It's what you are when you die. You're alive. What did your mother call you? The mention of her mother made the girl frown. A mask of hardness fell over her childlike features. "I don't have a mother," she said dryly. "She left with the circus man. She abandoned me in the barn." Arthur felt a bitter taste in his mouth. "Abandoned, like an unwanted cat. And your father?" "I've never seen it." She shrugged. "People in town call me Rat, or Trash, but I like Sparrow." "Sparrow," Arthur repeated. "A small, brown, common bird that survives on scraps and goes unnoticed. It suits you." He looked at the dirt encrusted on her skin. It wasn't just dust. It was a second skin of neglect. "You stink," Arthur said bluntly. "I'm not going to let you sleep in my house smelling of manure and rot. We're going to wash you." Panic returned to Sparrow's eyes. "No, I don't like water. Water is cold. The water here is hot," Arthur said, picking up a large copper bucket he used for washing clothes. He placed it near the stove. He began to boil water in large pots. The process of convincing Sparrow to get in the bath was a tense diplomatic negotiation. Arthur had to promise that he wouldn't look, that he would leave the kitchen door ajar so she could escape if she needed to, and that he would give her a piece of cheese afterward. Finally, she agreed. Arthur left the kitchen, sitting in the dark living room, listening to the sound of splashing water. He felt, what's strange, there was a noise in the house. A human noise. Not the creaking of floorboards or the wind in the chimney. There was life, and that made him uncomfortable. He had spent 10 years cultivating silence as if it were a rare orchid. "I'm finished." Her voice came from the kitchen, muffled. Arthur entered. Sparrow was wrapped in a giant towel he had left for her. Her wet hair was stuck to her head, revealing how small her skull was. But her skin was now white, pale, almost translucent, and her face. Arthur stopped. His heart leaped painfully in his chest. Clean, without soot or grime, Sparrow bore a chilling resemblance. Not to Eleanor, but to Samuel, her son. The same pointed chin, the same large, wide-set eyes, the same vulnerability in the curve of his mouth. It was a cruel coincidence. The universe was playing a trick on him, bringing a child who looked like the son he had lost to sleep in his grave. "What's wrong?" Sparrow asked, seeing his expression. "Am I still dirty?" "No," Arthur said, his voice hoarse. He looked away, unable to face that living ghost. "You single quotes acceptable." He went to a trunk in the hallway. Old clothes. Clothes he hadn't touched in 10 years. He pulled out a flannel shirt that had belonged to Samuel when he was 8 years old. It was blue, plaid. Arthur felt the soft fabric and wanted to cry. But men like Arthur Vance don't cry. They swallow the pain until it turns to stone in their stomachs. "Put this on." He threw the shirt to her. "It'll be big, but it's better than those rags." Sparrow put on the shirt. The sleeves covered her hands. The hem reached her knees. She looked ridiculous and adorable. She smelled the sleeve. "It smells like lavender," she said, surprised. "And not sadness." Arthur looked at her, shocked by the girl's realization. "It smells like mothballs," he corrected sharply. "Now let's go. You sleep on the couch. And if you steal anything, I'll cut off your fingers." It was an empty threat, and Sparrow knew it. She smiled. A small, shy smile, missing a canine tooth. "You're not going to cut off my fingers," she said confidently. "You gave me soup." Arthur snorted and turned off the light. "Don't push your luck, Sparrow. Tomorrow morning, you're leaving." But as he climbed the stairs to his lonely room, Arthur knew, with the heavy certainty of an anchor sinking in the sea, that she wasn't going away tomorrow, and that he was in far greater trouble than he had imagined. The ghost of breakfast and the first battle. Morning arrived with the subtlety of a hammer. Arthur awoke to a sound he hadn't heard in a decade, the clinking of crockery. Not the ghostly sound of his memories, but the real, physical sound of ceramic striking wood. He sat up in bed, his heart racing. For a second, the fog of sleep deceived him. Eleanor. But reality rushed back. Eleanor was under the cold stone on the hill. The one in the kitchen was the intruder, the Sparrow girl. Arthur came down the stairs. Wearing his work shirt and suspenders, his face contorted in his usual scowl. He expected to find chaos. He expected to find stolen food and the back door wide open. What he found was organization. Sparrow was standing on a stool, reaching for the cupboard. She had already placed 2 plates on the table. 2 mugs. The bread was sliced crooked, but sliced. The coffee was boiling on the stove, a strong, burnt smell, indicating she had used too much grounds. But it was coffee. She turned around when she heard his footsteps. She was still wearing Samuel's shirt, which looked like a dress on her. "I made coffee," she announced proudly. "I saw how you made it yesterday. It's as black as pitch. Men like their coffee like this, don't they?" Arthur looked at the set table. 2 places. He felt a lump in his throat. He ate standing up, at the sink, or sitting on the porch, alone. The dining table was neutral territory, a demilitarized zone he avoided. "Who told you to mess with my things?" He grumbled, going to the stove and pouring himself a mug. He tasted it. It was awful, strong enough to dissolve a horseshoe. He drank it anyway. "Nobody," she replied, stepping down from the stool. "But you said I was leaving today. I thought I should pay for the soup and the bath before I went. My mother used to say that nothing is free, not even the air we breathe." The cynical maturity in her voice contrasted painfully with her childlike face. Arthur glanced at her over the rim of his mug. "Your mother seemed like a lovely woman," he said sarcastically. "She was pretty," Sparrow said defensively, "but she liked whiskey more than she liked me." Silence fell over the kitchen. Arthur sat down at the table. He glanced at the empty place sitting opposite him. Sparrow hesitated, then sat down as well. "Eat," he ordered, pushing the bread toward her. They ate in silence. Arthur watched the girl. She had no manners, but a strange dignity about her. She meticulously cleaned the crumbs from the table. "So," Arthur said, wiping his mouth. "Where are you going?" Sparrow stopped chewing. She looked out the window. "I don't know. Maybe to Mr. Miller's barn. He has spirited horses. If I stay quiet, he won't see me. Miller unleashes the dogs at night," Arthur warned. "They'll tear you to pieces before you even reach the door." "Then I'll go to the bridge," she said, her voice fading. "It's dry under the bridge." Arthur looked at her hands. Small, scarred, hands that had worked harder than those of many grown men. He thought of the bridge. Damp, full of rats and drunks. "Do you know how to work?" he asked suddenly. Sparrow raised his head, his eyes gleaming with cautious hope. "I know. I know how to sweep. I know how to wash. I know how to collect eggs. I even know how to milk a goat if it's not too wild." Arthur drummed his fingers on the table. He was about to make a mistake. A huge mistake. He knew it, but the image of her sleeping on Eleanor's grave wouldn't leave his head. "I need someone to clean the chicken coop." He lied. The co-op had been empty 4 years. He bought eggs in town, and to pull the weeds from the vegetable garden. "It's dirty work, and I don't pay in money. I pay in food and shelter." Sparrow flashed a smile that lit up the dark kitchen. He was missing a tooth, yes, but it was the most genuine smile Arthur had seen in a decade. "I accept," she almost shouted. "I'm good with weeds. I pull them out by the root." "Calm down." Arthur raised his hand. "There are rules. First, you don't come into my room. Second, you don't touch Mrs. Vance's things in the living room. Third, you don't go up the hill without me. Understood?" "I understand." She nodded vigorously. "Can I start now?" "You can." Arthur stood up. "The chicken coop is behind the barn. The tools are there. If you break anything, you'll go to the bridge." Sparrow jumped out of her chair and ran for the back door. She stopped before going out and looked at him. "Thank you, Mr. Arthur," she said. "It's Mr. Vance," he corrected, sharply. "Okay, Mr. Vance." She laughed and ran off into the morning sun. Arthur was alone in the kitchen. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Less oppressive. He looked at the empty coffee mug. He looked at the set table. "What are you doing, you old fool?" he muttered to himself. He walked to the window and watched Sparrow running toward the abandoned chicken coop. her arms outstretched as if she were flying. She seemed so small in that big, dangerous world. Arthur felt a pang in his chest. It wasn't pain, it was fear. Fear of caring, fear of losing something again. Because he knew, from experience, that fate loves to give gifts only to have the pleasure of breaking them in front of you. He picked up his hat. He had fences to mend. And now, apparently, he had a little girl to raise. He sighed and left, slamming the door shut as if to close the entrance to his own feelings. But the door, he realized too late, was already wide open. The haunted chicken coop and the corn doll. The following days established a strange and fragile routine at the Vance ranch. Arthur would leave before sunrise to tend to the cattle, returning only at nightfall, exhausted and dirty. Sparrow, for his part, waged his own war against the neglect that had taken over the property. The chicken coop, which Arthur had said was merely dirty, was in fact an archaeological ruin of petrified droppings and rat nests. But Sparrow tackled the task with the ferocity of a general. She scraped, swept, and washed until the old wood regained its natural color. She found fossilized eggs and feathers from chickens that had died before she was born. But it was on the third day that the silent truce was tested. Arthur returned early, around 4 in the afternoon, because one of his horses had lost a horseshoe. As he passed the back porch, he heard voices, low, whispered. He stopped, his hand reaching for his revolver. Sparrow was alone, he was sure. Who could she be talking to? He approached silently and peered around the corner of the house. Sparrow was sitting on the porch steps. In her lap, she had dried ears of corn. She was twisting the husks, tying them with string. She was making dolls. There were 3 of them lined up on the step. "You are Mrs. Elegant," Sparrow said to one of the dolls, deepening his voice. "You live in the castle and eat cake every day. And you," she picked up another, smaller doll, "you're the lost daughter. You have to sweep the floor, but don't be sad. Mr. Giant will give you soup." Arthur felt a pang in his chest. Mr. Giant, that's how she saw him. A benevolent ogre who handed out soup in exchange for slave labor. He cleared his throat, emerging from the shadows. Sparrow jumped, knocking the dolls over. I've already finished the chicken coop," she said quickly, her eyes wide. "I was just resting a little. Don't send me away." Arthur looked at the corn dolls. They were rough, ugly, but carefully made. "I'm not going to send you away for playing around," he said, sitting down on the step next to her, keeping a respectful distance. He picked up one of the dolls. "Mrs. Elegant, eh?" Sparrow blushed. "That's nonsense. Childish stuff. You're a child," Arthur reminded him. "Children play. Samuel had toy soldiers. He used to have wars in the living room. I would stomp on them in the dark and curse like a sailor." Sparrow laughed. It was a short, nervous sound. "Who is Samuel?" Arthur froze. He had mentioned the name. He never mentioned the name. "My son," he said, his voice harsh. "He died a long time ago." "Ah," Sparrow said. She picked up the lost daughter doll and squeezed it. "How did he die?" The question was direct, unfiltered, as only children can do. Arthur looked towards the horizon. "Fever," he said. "It came on fast. It took him and his mother in 3 days. The money was useless. The doctors were useless. God was useless." Sparrow was silent for a moment. Then she placed her dirty little hand on his knee. The touch was light, like a feather, but Arthur felt it as if it were a branding iron. "My mother didn't die of fever," she said. "She died of sadness. She drank the sadness medicine until she fell asleep and never woke up again. I think fever is better. At least it's warm." Arthur looked at her, an 8-year-old girl debating which death was preferable. What kind of world raised children like that? "No death is good, Sparrow," he said softly. "Death is just the end. What matters is what you do before it." He stood up, brushing the dust off his trousers. He felt exposed, vulnerable. He didn't like it. "I'm going to town tomorrow," he announced, changing the subject. "I need nails and salt. You're coming with me." Sparrow's eyes widened. "To the city?" But what if they see me? The baker said he'd beat me up if he saw me again. Let the baker try, Arthur said, and there was a dangerous glint in his eyes, the old glint of Arthur Vance. The man no one dared cross. You're with me now, and no one touches what's mine. The phrase hung in the air. Ingwa Tismini. Arthur didn't realize the weight of what he had said until he saw Sparrow's face. She didn't smile. She just looked at him with such intense adoration that Arthur had to look away. Go wash up, he ordered sharply. We're leaving early tomorrow, and wear the blue shirt. I want you to look presentable. He entered the house, his heart pounding. He was taking on a public responsibility. Bringing the girl to town was a statement. It was telling everyone, she's under my protection, and in Red Creek. That meant picking a fight with half the population who considered her a nuisance. But Arthur Vance never shied away from a fight, especially now that he had, for the first time in 10 years, a real reason to fight. The trial on Main Street and the yellow dress. The town of Red Creek was a scar of wood and dust in the middle of the valley. A wide main street, lined with buildings with false facades, saloons that smelled of stale beer, and a white church that seemed to judge everyone from atop its hill. When Arthur Vance's wagon entered the town, the usual hustle and bustle of commerce subsided. Heads turned, curtains moved. Arthur Vance didn't come to town for a stroll. He came, bought what he needed, and left, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence. But today, he wasn't alone. Beside him, on the wagon seat, was little Sparrow, wearing Samuel's oversized plaid shirt, her hair combed back with water and bare fat, the only thing Arthur had to tame her unruly locks. She was huddled up, trying to make herself invisible. She knew that street. She knew the alleys where she had slept, the garbage cans where she had eaten, the boots that had kicked her. Arthur stopped the cart in front of the general store. He got down and walked around, extending his arms towards Sparrow. Get down, he said, head held high. You didn't steal anything today. Sparrow hesitated, then leaped, ignoring his arms. She landed on the dusty ground and immediately positioned herself beside his leg, using it as a shield. They entered the warehouse. The door bell rang. Mr. Higgins, the owner, a fat man with a flour-stained apron, smiled when he saw Arthur, but the smile faded when he saw the girl. Mr. Vance, Higgins greeted nervously. And rat, what's she doing here? If she steals a single candy, I'll call the sheriff. Arthur walked to the counter. He placed his large hands on the polished wood and leaned forward. Higgins instinctively recoiled. Her name is Sparrow, Arthur said, his voice low but heavy with thunder, and she's with me. If you call the sheriff, tell him to bring reinforcements. Now, I want a 50-pound sack of salt, 2 pounds of nails. And in double quotes he glanced at Sparrow, who was staring intently at a glass jar filled with colorful candies, double quotes, and a bag of those red candies. Higgins blinked, confused. Bullets? Mr. Vance, are you deaf? Higgins? Bullets. As Higgins hurried to fetch the orders, the door opened again. A group of ladies from the Mutual Aid Society entered. They were the guardians of Red Creek's morality, led by Mrs. Gable, the banker's wife, a woman who wielded her piety as a blunt weapon. They stopped when they saw Arthur and the girl. The whispering began immediately. It's her, the beggar woman, sleeping in his house. What a scandal, double quotes. Mrs. Gable approached, her nose in the air as if she smelled something bad. Mr. Vance, she said, with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's surprising to see you, and with Bob Company. We heard you took in this street child. That's very kind of you, but you should know that a single man living alone with a little girl. Well, people talk. Arthur turned slowly. He looked at Mrs. Gable with the same disdain he reserved for coyotes. People talk because they have big mouths and small brains. Mrs. Gable, he said, and if anyone has something to say about my conduct, they can say it to my face, not whisper behind my back like a bunch of old geese. Mrs. Gable blushed with indignation. I was only thinking about the child's well-being. The state orphanage in Denver would be a much more appropriate place. The orphanage? Sparrow whispered. grabbing Arthur's trousers. The fear in his voice was palpable. The orphanage was the boogeyman of all street children, a place from which no one ever returned unscathed. Arthur placed his hand on Sparrow's shoulder. It was a possessive, protective gesture. "She has a roof over her head," Arthur declared to the entire store. "She has food, and she has me. If the orphanage wants to take her, they'll have to come through my gate. And I assure you, Mrs. Gable, my Winchester isn't very hospitable to child thieves." The silence in the shop was absolute. Arthur picked up his purchases, tossed a few silver coins on the counter far more than necessary, and guided Sparrow out. But before they left, he stopped in front of a clothes rack. There was a dress there. Simple, yellow cotton, with small white flowers. "Higgins," Arthur called without turning around. "Include the dress, and a pair of boots that will fit her." Sparrow looked the dress. Then Acha to her eyes filled with tears. "It's yellow," she whispered, "like the sun." "Yeah," Arthur grumbled. "Now let's go. I'm starting to smell the hypocrisy, and it's giving me heartburn." They went out into the street. Sparrow walked a little straighter now. She held the bag of red bullets against her chest like a treasure. And, for the first time in her life, she didn't look at the ground as she passed people. She looked ahead, because the giant was beside her, and he had just declared war on the world for her. Midnight fever and the broken promise. Victory in the city came at a price. That night, Sparrow didn't eat. She sat at the table, pale, pushing the food from one side of her plate to the other. Arthur, still buzzing with adrenaline from the confrontation with Mrs. Gable, "You were slow to notice." "What's wrong?" he asked, annoyed. "Isn't the stew fit for royalty today?" "My head hurts," Sparrow whispered, "and I'm cold." Arthur looked at her. She was trembling despite the roaring fire in the fireplace. He stood up and touched her forehead. It was burning, not just hot. It radiated heat like a stone left in the midday sun. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced Arthur's stomach. Fever. The same fever that had taken Samuel. The same fever that had taken Eleanor. "No," double quotes he murmured, recoiling as if she were radioactive. "Not again." He picked her up. She seemed lighter than ever. A little bird of hollow bones. He carried her into the living room, placing her on the sofa near the fire. He covered her with all the blankets he could find. "Sparrow," he called, gently patting her face. She opened her eyes, but they were glazed over, staring right through him. "Mom?" she murmured. "Has the circus man left already?" Arthur felt a punch in the stomach. Delirium, he ran to the kitchen. Water, cloths, vinegar. He knew what to do. He had done this for 3 days, and 3 nights with his son. Feld. The memory of those nights came rushing back. The smell of sour sweat, the noisy breathing, the final silence. He spent the entire night by her side, changing the compresses, forcing water down her throat, praying to a God he no longer believed in. "Please," he whispered to the dark ceiling. "Not her. Take her to me. I'm old. I'm useless. She's just a child. She just got a yellow dress. Don't let her die without wearing it." Around 3 in the morning, Sparrow's breathing changed. It became a wheezing, moist, gurgling sound. Pneumonia! His lungs were filling with fluid. Arthur knew what that meant. He needed a doctor. But the town doctor, Dr. Evans, was a drunk who was probably passed out by now. And even if he were sober, he wouldn't come to the ranch in the middle of the night for a street rat. There was only one option. The old remedy. The remedy his grandmother used. A poultice of mustard and onion for the chest, and eucalyptus steam. But he had no eucalyptus. He had to leave. He had to go to the riverbank, where the eucalyptus trees grew wild. "I'll be right back," he told the unconscious girl. "Don't you dare stop breathing. That's an order." He went out into the cold night. He mounted his horse, without a saddle, and galloped like a madman into the darkness. The wind cut his face, but he didn't feel it. He only saw Sparrow's pale face. He reached the river, jumped off his horse, and began frantically tearing off eucalyptus leaves, stuffing his pockets with them. That's when he heard it. A crack! A branch breaking. He turned around. his hand on the revolver. From the shadows of the trees, 3 figures emerged. Men, with scarves covering their faces. Well, said a familiar voice. It was the foreman of the neighboring ranch, a man named Pike, known for his cruelty. Old Vance came out of his burrow and left the little door open. Arthur stiffened. "What do you want, Pike? We heard you have a new mascot." Pike laughed, twirling a knife in his hand. "Mrs. Gable thinks she'd be better off, far away from here, and she pays well to anyone who solves sanitation problems." Arthur understood. They weren't there by chance. They were watching the house, waiting for him to leave. They were going to get Sparrow. They were going to take her to the orphanage, or worse, leave her somewhere to die of exposure for the good of the community. The fury that Arthur felt was white, blinding. They wanted to take away the only thing that had made him feel alive in 10 years. And they wanted to do it while she was dying of fever. "You made a mistake, Pike," Arthur said, his voice calm, deathly calm. "Really? And what was it?" Pike scoffed, stepping forward. "You were caught between a father and his daughter," Arthur said. And then Arthur Vance, the man who had sworn never to love again, drew his weapon, not to defend his land, not to defend his money, but to defend the life of a girl who didn't share his blood, but who had stolen his heart. The baptism of fire and wild medicine, the shootout by the river wasn't a gentleman's duel. It was a swift and brutal execution. Pike and his men were expecting a rusty old farmer. They found a demon. Arthur fired 3 times. 2 men fell screaming, clutching their legs. Pike, slower, tried to raise his weapon, but Arthur was already over him. With one fluid motion, Arthur struck Pike's wrist with the barrel of the revolver, breaking the bone with an audible crack, and then hit the man's temple with the butt of the gun. Pike collapsed like a sack of potatoes. Arthur didn't stop to check if they were alive. They didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was 3 kilometers away, struggling to breathe. He mounted his horse and sped back home, the crumpled eucalyptus leaves in his pocket smelling of medicine and despair. When he entered the house, the silence was terrifying. The fire in the fireplace had died down. Sparrow lay motionless on the sofa. "Sparrow," he shouted, running towards her. She didn't answer. Her lips were blue. She was barely breathing. Arthur ran to the kitchen. He threw the eucalyptus leaves into a pot of boiling water. The strong, minty smell filled the house. He carried the steaming pot into the living room, placed it on the floor near the sofa, and covered Sparrow's head in the pot with a sheet, creating a steam tent. "Breathe," he ordered, entering the tent with her and holding her seated. "Take a deep breath. Little bird, come on." The steam was suffocating, hot. Sparrow coughed, a weak, wet sound, but she inhaled. Arthur stood there, in the warm darkness of the sheet tent, holding the girl against his chest. He could feel each of her ribs. He could feel her heart beating fast and weak, like a bird trapped in a hand. "Don't go," he whispered in her ear, tears finally streaming down his face, mingling with sweat and steam. "I can't do this again. I can't bury anyone else. If you stay, I promise I'll take you to see the sea. You said you wanted to see the sea, didn't you? I'll take you. I'll sell the ranch. I'll sell everything. But you have to stay." The hours passed. The night outside cleared to a gray dawn. The water in the pot cooled. Arthur was exhausted, hunched over, almost asleep sitting down. Suddenly, he felt a movement. Sparrow stirred. She took a deep breath, a long, trembling, but clear sigh, without the hiss of death. Arthur lifted the sheet. Morning light streamed in through the window. Color had returned somewhat to her cheeks. The fever had broken. She was sweating profusely, but her skin no longer burned. She opened her eyes. They were tired, sunken, but focused. She looked at Arthur. "Are you crying?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Arthur quickly wiped his face with his shirt sleeve. "It's the steam. It burns my eyes." Sparrow smiled faintly. "You smell like a tree, and you smell alive," Arthur said, and let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. He hugged her, burying his face in her damp hair. Thank God. Thank God. Actually, that moment Arthur Vance knew his old life was over. The man who visited the grave every day was dead. The man who held the girl was alive, terrified, and full of purpose. But the peace was short-lived. Loud, authoritarian knocking on the door. "Open up, Vance!" It's Sheriff Miller. Arthur froze. Pike should have spoken, or someone must have heard the gunshots. He looked at Sparrow. "Stay here," he said, covering her again. "Don't make a sound." He stood up, picked up his revolver from the table still smelling of gunpowder from the previous night and walked to the door. He opened it. Sheriff Miller was there, accompanied by 2 deputies armed with rifles. And behind them, Mrs. Gable, with an expression of vengeful triumph. "Arthur Vance," the sheriff said formally, "you are under arrest for attempted murder and assault against Mr. Pike and his men, and we have a court order to remove the minor from your custody and transfer her to the state orphanage." Arthur looked at the guns pointed at him. It was 3 against 1, and Sparrow was too weak to run. He had lost you. "You're not taking her," he said, blocking the door with his body. "Don't make this any harder." "Arthur," the sheriff warned, cocking his rifle, "get out of the way or we'll shoot. And I don't think you want the girl to see you bleeding on the carpet." Arthur looked back at the sofa where Sparrow lay. If he died, she would go to the orphanage anyway, and she would be alone. He dropped the gun. It fell to the floor with a dull thud. "All right," he said, raising his hands. "I'll go, but let her recover. She's been sick all night. The orphanage doctor will take care of her," Mrs. Gable said, pushing Arthur aside and entering the house as if she owned the place. Arthur was handcuffed. He saw when Mrs. Gable grabbed Sparrow, who was screaming and kicking, too weak to really fight. "Arthur! Arthur!" she screamed, being dragged outside. "Don't let them take me." "You promised." "I'll come get you," Arthur shouted as the deputies shoved him toward the prison wagon. "I promise." "Sparrow, I'll come get you." The wagon door slammed shut, plunging Arthur into darkness. But this Jimmy the darkness wasn't empty. It was filled with rage, and Arthur Vance had a plan. He was going to tear down that town, brick by brick, until he got his daughter back. The iron cell and the pact with the devil. The cell at the Red Creek police station was a cube of cold stone and iron bars that smelled of old urine and despair. Arthur Vance sat on the hard cot, his hands handcuffed, staring at the opposite wall with an intensity that could pierce concrete. He wasn't panicking. Panic is for those who have no options. Arthur was calculating. He knew how the law worked in that town. Sheriff Miller was a weak man, bought by the interests of the rich, like the banker Gable. The trial would be a farce. They would convict him of assault, maybe even attempted murder, and send him to the state penitentiary for 10 years. And Sparrow would disappear into the system, swallowed up by the orphanage, where his light would be extinguished forever. He needed to leave. Now, the door to the cell block opened. Sheriff Miller entered, carrying a tray of food that looked like pig's slop. He placed the tray on the floor and looked at Arthur through the bars. "You made a mess of things, Arthur," Miller said, shaking his head. "Pike's in the hospital with a crushed wrist. Mrs. Gable is furious. Why didn't you leave the girl alone? She was a problem that wasn't yours." "She's not a problem," Arthur said, his voice calm. "She's a child, and Pike was trying to kill her." "Pike said he was just passing by and you shot him like a madman," Miller retorted. "It's your word against 3 men's. And guess who the judge is going to believe? The man who pays the taxes or the hermit who talks to graves?" Arthur stood up and walked to the railings. "Miller," he said, "do you remember 10 years ago when the bank was going to take your house because you lost everything gambling?" The sheriff's face paled. He looked around to see if the deputies were listening. "Shut up, Vance. I paid your debt," Arthur continued relentlessly. "I went to the bank and paid every cent, anonymously, because I knew you had a pregnant wife and I didn't want to see another family destroyed." Miller took a step back, shocked. Was it you?" "It was," and I never asked for anything in return until now. Arthur gripped the bars with his handcuffed hands. I need 5 minutes. Miller, 5 minutes with the door unlocked, and I need to know where they took the girl. The sheriff was sweating profusely. I can single quotes T. If I do this, my career is over. The judge will hang me. If you don't, Arthur said, his eyes fixed on Miller's, your soul is finished. You'll live the rest of your life, knowing you condemned an innocent girl to hell to save your shitty job. Is that the man you want to be for your son? The silence in the police station was heavy. Miller looked at the keys on his belt. He looked at Arthur. He stared into nothingness, wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he sighed, a defeated sound. They took her to the train station. Miller whispered, "The train to Denver leaves in an hour. Mrs. Gable is going personally to make sure she gets admitted." He picked up the keys. With trembling hands, he unlocked the cell. "I'm going out to get coffee," Miller said, his voice trembling. "I'll leave the back door open. You knocked me out and ran away. Understand?" "I understand," Arthur said. Miller opened the cell. Arthur left. "Thank you, Jack," Arthur said, using the sheriff's first name for the first time in years. "Go to hell, Arthur," Miller replied, turning his back. "And don't come back." Arthur didn't wait. He ran to the back door, heading out into the alley. The sun was setting. He had less than an hour. He needed a horse. His was still at the ranch. He ran to the town stables. The stable boy was sleeping on a bale of hay. Arthur went in quietly, saddled the fastest horse. He saw a nervous little bay and mounted. He galloped out of the stable, ignoring the boy's cries. He sped through the city like lightning, knocking over market stalls, startling pedestrians. He didn't care. He had a train to catch. The train station was on the eastern outskirts of the city. Arthur saw the black smoke from the locomotive rising into the sky. The whistle sounded. To Long Blast's departure imminent. "No," double quotes, Arthur growled, spurring his horse. Faster. He arrived at the platform just as the steel wheels began to turn. The train was gaining speed. He saw Mrs. Gable at a passenger car window, adjusting her hat, and beside her, a small, huddled figure staring out with empty eyes. Sparrow. Arthur didn't stop. He guided the horse to run alongside the train. The animal snorted, its muscles stretched to their limit. Arthur released the reins, stood in the stirrups, and, in an act of desperate madness, leaped. He slammed against the side of the freight car, gripping the iron ladder. The impact nearly dislocated his shoulder. His feet dangled dangerously close to the grinding wheels. He grunted, pulling himself up, inch by inch, until he managed to climb onto the roof of the car. The wind up there was brutal. The smoke from the chimney was blinding. Arthur crawled across the roof of the moving train, jumping from carriage to carriage towards the passengers. He wasn't a movie hero. He was a 50-year-old man with arthritis in his knees and a broken heart. But he had a promise to keep. He reached the carriage where he had seen Sparrow. He went down the side stairs and looked out the window. Mrs. Gable was reading a newspaper. Sparrow was crying silently, his forehead pressed against the glass. Arthur smiled, a wild, dangerous smile. He kicked open the train car door. The noise of the wind and wheels filled the stuffy compartment. Mrs. Gable screamed, dropping the newspaper. The other passengers flinched. "End of the line, Mrs. Gable," Arthur announced, stepping into the carriage covered in soot, blood, and determination. Sparrow raised his head. His eyes widened. "Arthur!" she shouted, jumping off the bench. Mrs. Gable tried to restrain her. "Sit down. This man is a fugitive criminal." Arthur walked towards them. He didn't run. He walked with the authority of a king reclaiming his throne. He stopped in front of Mrs. Gable. "Let go of my daughter," he said. The word echoed in the train car. Daughter. Not the girl. Not the orphan. Daughter. Mrs. Gable looked into Arthur's eyes and saw something that made her immediately release Sparrow's arm. She saw that this man would rather derail the train with his own hands than let her take the girl. Sparrow ran into Arthur's arms. He lifted her up, hugging her tightly. smelling the cheap soapy odor from the orphanage that they were already trying to impregnate her with. "I told you I'd come get you," he whispered in her hair. "I knew it." She sobbed. "I knew the giant was coming." Arthur looked at Mrs. Gable, who was trembling in her seat. "Tell the sheriff I send my regards," Arthur said. He pulled the emergency cord. The train's brakes screeched, sparks flying from the wheels. The train shuddered and stopped in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the vast, open prairie. Arthur opened the exit door. He jumped onto the gravel floor and helped Sparrow down. The train stopped, puffing like a wounded beast. Arthur took Sparrow's hand and they began to walk away from the tracks, towards the setting sun. They had no horse. They had no home yet, but they had each other. And for Arthur Vance, this was more than he had had in 10 years. The trail of the iron dogs and the lesson of blood. Freedom has a metallic taste when you're being hunted. 3 weeks had passed since Arthur and Sparrow jumped off that train. 3 weeks walking through the Badlands, a land of red rock, cacti, and merciless sun that shows no mercy to weakness. They were no longer the old rancher and the orphan. They were a pack of two. Arthur had grown thin. His clothes hung loosely on his body, and his white beard had grown disheveled, giving him the appearance of an Old Testament prophet. Sparrow, on the other hand, seemed to have hardened. The sun had burned his pale skin, turning it into golden leather. The yellow dress, once a symbol of hope, was now torn at the hem and stained with dirt, tied at the waist with a rope to make walking easier. But the worst part wasn't the hunger or the thirst. It was the constant feeling of eyes in the back of my head. "They're still there, aren't they?" Sparrow asked. They were crouched atop a rocky ridge, watching the valley below. Arthur adjusted the focus of an old, cracked pair of binoculars he'd stolen from an abandoned trading post days before. Down below, miles away, 3 specks of dust drifted against the wind. "They are," Arthur confirmed, spitting on the dry floor. "Pinkertons, private detectives." Mrs. Gable didn't hold back. "Those men don't sleep, don't eat, and don't give up. They're iron dogs." "Why does she hate us so much?" Sparrow asked, his voice heavy with an exhaustion no child should ever know. "I only slept on the rock. I didn't break anything." Arthur lowered his binoculars and looked at her. "It's not hatred, Sparrow. It's control. People like Mrs. Gable think the world is a garden where they decide which plants grow and which weeds should be pulled. You defied her order, and I humiliated her. The wounded pride of a rich man is more dangerous than a grizzly bear." He stood up, his knees cracking. "Come on. We have to get to Devil's Canyon before nightfall. If they catch us in the open, we're dead." The walk was brutal. Arthur limped the old wound on his knee screaming, but he didn't stop. He taught Sparrow as they walked. Survival lessons worth more than gold. Never step on dry branches. Step on rocks or soft sand. If there is no water, cut down a barrel cactus. But beware of the milky sap. It is poisonous. If you have to hide, don't move. The human eye is trained to see movement, not shapes. As evening approached, hunger turned into a sharp physical pain. They hadn't eaten for 2 days. Arthur saw a hare hiding under a sage bush. He stopped. He didn't have a rifle. He'd lost it in the chaos of the prison. He only had a knife and stones. "Watch," he whispered to Sparrow. Arthur picked up a stone the size of a fist. He took a deep breath, becoming as still as a statue. He waited. 1 minute, 5, 10. The hare, thinking it was safe, came out of its burrow. Arthur's arm moved like a whip. The stone flew. There was a dull thud and a short screech. Sparrow shuddered. Arthur walked over to the animal, grabbed it by the ears, and returned. He handed the knife to Sparrow. "Clean it up," he ordered. Sparrow recoiled. His eyes Ouija. "He can't. She's coot. She's food," Arthur said harshly. "Pity doesn't fill bellies." "Sparrow, if you want to live, you have to accept that life feeds on life. Cleanse, or we don't eat." It was a cruel but necessary test. Sparrow picked up the knife with trembling hands. She wept as she did the work, but she did it. And when the meat roasted over the small, smokeless fire that Arthur had built in a rock crevice, she ate it. "I'm sorry, little bunny," she whispered as she chewed. Arthur watched her, his heart aching. He was killing her innocence to save her life. Was it a fair trade? He didn't know, but he knew the Pinkertons were closing in, and that innocence wouldn't stop a bullet. That night, Arthur didn't sleep. He kept watch, listening to the wind howling through the canyons. He knew the final confrontation was coming. They couldn't run forever. The pursuers. Horse was faster than the legs of an old man and a child. He looked at Sparrow sleeping, curled up in the old top. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the darkness. "Tomorrow we stop running and we start hunting. The ambush in the canyon and the weight of a life." Devil's Gorge lived up to its name. It was a narrow gorge with red sandstone walls that rose 300 meters toward the sky, creating a corridor of shadows and echoes. It was a place where the sound of a footstep sounded like thunder and where there was no side exit. It was a natural trap, and Arthur Vance chose it as his battlefield. "They'll come on horseback," Arthur explained, his voice echoing softly off the stone walls. "Horses are nervous in confined spaces. The echo confuses them. We'll use that." They spent the morning preparing the site. They had no dynamite, no firearms. They only had the environment. Arthur instructed Sparrow to collect stones, lots of stones the size of melons, and pile them on the edge of a natural ledge, 30 meters above the trail. "When I give the signal," Arthur said, looking into her eyes, "you push. Don't look down. Don't think about who's there. Just push. Understand?" Sparrow nodded, her face smeared with red dust, looking like a small tribal warrior. The fear was still there, but it had been tempered by necessity. Arthur descended to ground level. He hid behind a large fallen rock, clutching a makeshift spear he had fashioned from a mesquite branch hardened in the fire, with his knife tied to the end. It was a primitive, desperate weapon. At noon, the sound arrived. Shod, hooves striking the stone. Voices of confident men. "The trail is fresh," Mr. Black said a voice. "They're tired. Let's catch them before the next bend." There were 3 of them. The leader, Black, a man in a long feather duster coat and an expensive repeating rifle, and 2 unfriendly-looking henchmen. They entered the canyon, their horses snorting, their eyes scanning the shadows. Arthur waited. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate. He waited until they were directly below the parapet. He whistled, a high-pitched sound, imitating a hawk. Up there, Sparrow closed his eyes and pushed. The avalanche wasn't large, but it was noisy. The rocks fell, hitting the canyon walls, creating a roar that sounded like the end of the world. The horses panicked. Black's horse reared up, throwing him onto the hard ground. The other 2 spun around, colliding with each other. "Now," Arthur shouted, stepping out from behind the rock. He did not attack the men. He attacked the horses. He struck the rump of the nearest horse with the shaft of his lance. The terrified animal bolted down the canyon, throwing its rider off. Chaos reigned. Dust, screams, neighing. Black, dazed from the fall, tried to reach his rifle, which had fallen a few meters away. Arthur kicked the weapon away and placed the tip of his spear against the man's throat. "Don't move," Arthur growled. The other 2 men were getting up, drawing their weapons. "Drop your weapons," Arthur yelled, pressing the knife against Black's skin, "or your boss will need a tracheostomy." The men hesitated. Black, sweating profusely, raised his hand. "Do what he says. He's crazy." The weapons fell to the ground. Arthur looked up. Sparrow was on the edge, staring down, her eyes wide with horror. She had seen the violence. She had seen the blood trickling from Black's nose. "Sparrow, come down," Arthur ordered, without taking his eyes off the enemies. "Take their weapons." The girl went down the goat trail, slipping and scraping her knees. She ran to the fallen weapons. They were heavy for her. She dragged the rifles away. Arthur looked at Black. "Who paid you?" he asked, even though he knew the answer. "Gable," Black spat, regaining some of his arrogance. "And she paid double to whoever kills you. Vance, you can't run forever. It's a small world. The world is big enough for those who know how to hide," Arthur said. He took a rope from Black's horse's saddle. "Tie them up," he told Sparrow. "What?" The girl trembled. "Tie their hands. Really tightly, like I taught you how to tie knots." Sparrow obeyed. She tied the men up, one by one, while Arthur kept the spear pointed. When they were finished, the three Pinkertons sat back to back, humiliated by an old man and a child. Arthur took their water canteens. He took the dry food from the saddlebags. And he took Black's rifle. "You have a long ride back," Arthur said, mounting Black's horse and pulling Sparrow behind him. "No water. Rossa, perhaps this will give you time to consider whether Mrs. Gable's money is worth dying of thirst. You're a dead man, Vance." Black yelled as they walked away. Arthur stopped his horse. He looked back. "I died 10 years ago." "Black," he said, "what you're seeing is just a ghost that's come back to haunt people like you." He spurred his horse, and they galloped out of the canyon, leaving the hunting dogs behind, howling at the empty walls. Sparrow hugged Arthur's waist tightly. "Were you going to kill him?" she asked softly, her voice muffled by the wind. Arthur took a while to reply. "If necessary, yes," he admitted. "But today, Sparrow, today we choose mercy, not for them, for you. I didn't want the first thing you saw up close to be the death of a man." Sparrow tightened his embrace. "Thank you," she said. They rode off into the sunset, finally armed, finally mounted, and finally free from the hot breath of the chase. The road to Oregon was still long, but now they were no longer prey. They were survivors. The bonfire of truth and the new family. The walk across the prairie was long and silent, but not sad. Night fell, covering the world with a blanket of stars. Arthur and Sparrow stopped near a stream, sheltered by a group of cottonwood trees. Arthur built a small, efficient fire using dry kindling and his ranching skills. They sat near the fire, warming their hands. Sparrow was still wearing the yellow dress, now stained with soot from the train and red dust from the canyon, but she didn't seem to mind. She gazed at the flames with a newfound maturity in her eyes. "Where are we going?" she asked, breaking the silence that was only interrupted by the creaking of wood. "To the west," Arthur replied, poking the fire with a branch. "I have a cousin in Oregon. He has a sawmill. He owes me a favor. There the trees are so tall they touch the sky, and the rain washes away any trace. And the ranch?" she asked, her voice small. "And Mrs. Eleanor? And Samuel?" Arthur stopped. He stared into the darkness toward Red Creek, miles and miles behind them. "They're where the bell reside softly, on their hill. But I think they don't care if I leave. I think they're tired of seeing me sad. They're tired of seeing me watering stones with tears." He looked at Sparrow. The firelight danced on her face, illuminating her freckles and the small scar on her chin. "Do you know why I brought you here?" he asked. Sparrow shrugged, pulling his knees to his chest. "Why are you so stubborn? And why do I know how to make bad coffee?" Arthur laughed, a genuine, deep laugh that shook his tired shoulders. "Also, but it's because when I saw you sleeping in that tomb, I realized something. I spent 10 years tending to stones, polishing granite, bringing flowers to those who couldn't smell them. And while I was doing that, I let my heart turn to stone too. I was dead, Sparrow. I just forgot to lie down." He reached out and touched her shoulder. His hand, large and calloused, felt like a shield over her fragile shoulder. "You reminded me that the living need more love than the dead. You saved me, Sparrow. I thought I was saving you from the rain, but it was you who pulled me from the grave." Sparrow smiled, and her eyes glistened with tears that reflected the stars. She stood and walked over to him, sitting down beside him and resting her head on his shoulder. "You're a good father, Arthur," she said. The word father came out naturally, without weight, as if it had always belonged there. Arthur put his arm around her, pulling her close. The warmth of that small, living body against his was better than any sun, better than any memory. "I'll try to be," he promised, his voice choked with emotion. "I'll try to be the father you deserve." And the father Samuel didn't have time to know. They stood there, silent, watching the fire burn until it turned to embers, to fugitives. a broken old man and a patched-up girl, but together, under that immense and indifferent sky, they were an impregnable fortress. The legacy of Madeira and the call of the sanctuary. 2 years later, a brand new log cabin, smelling of fresh pine and resin, stood on the edge of a dense forest in Oregon. The sound of a saw echoed in the distance, rhythmic and steady, like the heartbeat of that new life. The air there was humid, green, and full of oxygen, very different from the dry dust of Red Creek. On the wide porch, a 10-year-old girl, taller and stronger, sat on a wooden swing, reading aloud from a book to an old dog sleeping at her feet. Blue, who had survived the journey and was now enjoying a well-deserved retirement. And then the giant said, "No one touches what is mine." She read, improvising the ending of the story with a mischievous smile. A man emerged from the house, wiping his sawdust-covered hands with a cloth. Arthur Vance looked younger, though his hair was whiter. His beard was trimmed. The wrinkles of bitterness around his mouth had vanished, replaced by lines of laughter around his eyes. His eyes were bright. "That's not in the book, Sparrow," he laughed, sitting down in the rocking chair next to her. "It should be," she retorted, slamming the book shut. "It's the best part. It's the part where the hero wins." Arthur looked at her with a pride that couldn't be contained. She was safe. She was happy. She was reading. She was no longer Rat. She was Sparrow Vance. "Is dinner ready?" she asked, sniffing the air. "I made stew," Arthur said, winking, "and this time I put carrots in it. And don't complain. Carrots help you see in the dark." "Ooh," she grimaced, but stood up smiling, taking his hand. "Okay, Mr. Giant, let's eat your magic carrots." Before going inside, Arthur stopped and looked up at the sky. An eagle flew high, free, gliding above the treetops of the giant trees. He touched his shirt pocket, where he kept an old medallion with a picture of Eleanor and Samuel. The metal felt warm against his chest. "Thank you," he whispered to the wind coming from the Pacific. "Thank you for sending her to me, and thank you for letting me go." He turned and followed his daughter into the warm, bright house. The door closed with a solid, secure sound, and outside, the sun continued to shine on the sanctuary he had built, not on tombs, but on foundations of love and new wood. The story of Arthur and Sparrow reminds us of a brutal truth that we often forget. Grief is a place we go to visit, not to live. Arthur built a house on top of his pain and almost died in it, suffocated by his own loyalty to the dead. It took a girl who had nothing, no home, no name, no shoes to teach him that the only cure for death is life. How many of us are, right now, tending to cold stones? How many of us have closed our hearts because the pain of loss was too great and we decided that we would never love again so as never to suffer again? If this story touched a wound you've been hiding, if you believe it's never too late to rise from the grave and love again, if you believe family isn't just blood, but who bleeds for you, then you found your place. This channel is the sanctuary of the broken. Here, we don't hide our scars. We wear them as badges of honor. Don't leave without making your mark on our history. Sign up now. Join our family of survivors. And in the comments, leave the phrase, "Life conquers the stone," because as long as there is someone to protect, there will be a reason to live. I am the Guardian. Keep your gunpowder dry and your heart open. Until the next story,